Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined this week by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
How you doing?
Dave, how you doing?
Pretty good. It was today, right now, is the day after Election Day, so there's a bit of recovery going on.
Let's just be honest. You and Thad are broken.
Yeah. I admit it.
A little bit in the post-election fog. It was a long night.
Yeah, say the least. And there's still things to be determined, of course, but overall, it was engaging and it was, we did our civic duty. So we have that to power our batteries today. So why don't we just dive right in? And Thad, why don't you tell us what you covered this week on the news beat at the North Coast Journal?
Yeah, this week we have a cover story that's a little bit out of our normal bounds. Usually, we're kind of hyper local focused, and this week we plucked a story from Inside Climate News, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom that just covers the climate crisis from various angles and from various continents. And so this was a story that they put out looking at COP27, the United Nations Climate Change Conference that just began, I guess, this week. I think it in earnest starts today, although I think the meetings officially started on Monday. And so the pieces, I really encourage everybody to read it. I think it's still somewhat staggering the degree, and this is a point made in the story, but that kind of average people don't really understand what is being done on a global level to address climate change, and don't understand kind of what these conferences are about, what they do, what they don't do, and kind of the approach to developing a global framework to combating what is rapidly escalating crisis. And so I think the story serves as a really good placeholder for just kind of what folks should think about when looking at news coverage of COP27 over the next week, and what types of things they should be looking to come out of the climate conference, and then what kinds of how they should interpret what those things mean.
Yeah, so just high level stuff. This is COP is Conference of Parties.
Mm-hmm. Conference of Parties.
Yep, and then it's sponsored by the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework for the Convention of Climate Change Convention. So that's the general body, and they're the ones who keep reminding us that just a degree or two of Celsius, which is 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit, how it could wreak havoc on civilization as we know it. And it seems overwhelming, but the article does a pretty good job of saying these are the things you might need to pay attention to. There's a couple experts in there. Do you have any final thoughts on this one before we move on to a different story you guys are following?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just real briefly is just to underscore the degree of crisis that we're facing. That, as you said, I think 2.5 degrees Celsius in global temperature rise is expected by 2100 the year, and basically, scientists predict that would be a catastrophic event. And so we're now looking at this in our children's lifetimes of mass extinction events, and they're becoming essentially uninhabitable. So it's time to act. I think people look at the Kyoto Agreement and the Paris Agreement as kind of binding things that solved our problems, and they are very, very far from it. And so I just want to reinforce, I guess, to everybody that these climate change is something that we all need to take very seriously. We need to demand our local leaders take seriously, our state leaders, and our national leaders take seriously.
Yeah, those commitments, instead of meeting those commitments, we're going in the wrong direction. We're not making the 30-40% cuts. We are increasing carbon currently by 10%. So we're going in the totally wrong direction. I'll just add one last thought on this. One of the experts in the article, definitely check it out because there's a lot in there, but Robert Rohde, lead scientist for Berkeley Earth, I liked his quote near the end. It said, I think it's probably asking a bit much of the man on the street to care about the international climate negotiation structure, but I think I want them to care about keeping emissions down and making progress. So that if there's any takeaway at all, it's think about we got to lower emissions, we got to make progress. It like has to happen. So thank you for making this the cover story this week and bringing it to the community's attention for context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also have another story to share with us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, we have another story, again, a national story about the Indian Child Welfare Act coming before the U.S. Supreme Court this week, with oral arguments beginning today in a case that really challenges the constitutionality of the act. We think it's a really interesting story. It actually doesn't have kind of dire implications locally, because even if the Supreme Court rules the act unconstitutional, California already has legislative framework in place that kind of binds local courts and local tribes to continue as if the act were in place. But what it does do, I think the story really clearly articulates some really interesting questions of native sovereignty and the unique relationships that tribal governments have with the United States. And this is, as a legal framework, they are treated entirely differently, and I believe rightfully so, than the rest of us. And there are some organizations through the lens of the Child Welfare Act that are challenging that all the way to the Supreme Court. So while I don't think the outcome of this case will have dramatic implications for child welfare proceedings in Humboldt County or in California, it certainly could have dramatic impacts nationwide on the relationships between sovereign governments and the United States government, and on issues as fundamental as states' rights issues versus federalism. So,
yeah.
Interesting stuff at play.
Yeah, and so that's the huge piece here, right? Is that the federal government passed a law a long time ago. I'm looking for it, but I think it's like in the 70s or 60s, basically saying that 78. There you go, 1978. That affects the preference for families who might have the opportunity to adopt tribal children, and it's just to protect tribal integrity, so that the preference would go towards maintaining people within their own communities, rather than have, for example, them be dispersed to this family who's the plaintiffs, which is a family out in Texas that is fighting on behalf of their personal right to supersede the law that wants to keep the tribal communities intact. And then so if this one rule breaks down, then any federal guidance of this nature could any of those rules could break down. So there's a lot more in there, and I definitely recommend people check it out. It's real interesting. And any final thoughts on this one before we move on to local elections?
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore that I think it's a really interesting legal story, and just to, like I said, to understand the very unique relationship between tribal governments and the U.S. government, and some of the lenses which those relationships should be viewed.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, to defend the law is the quote is tribes, child welfare experts, and medical experts, those who know the law and the needs of children best, overwhelmingly oppose the efforts to overturn this law. And so that's in play, and this court has no fear about overturning precedent and law. So we'll see how this plays out. And again, thanks for bringing it to the community's attention, because it's really important.
Absolutely.
Finally, speaking of important, I know we kind of tried to skim across the top of these so we could land here. Today is the day after Election Day, and although we are suffering our own version of fatigue, there are some interesting takeaways. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your high-level observations about the outcome of yesterday's election? Yeah,
so I think that I actually, as I wrote in the paper this week, kind of much like I think we're seeing nationally, where there was no, dramatic wave and huge thematic takeaways. I think we kind of saw that locally. But there's a unique, midterm race locally where we have a lot of council seats opened and a lot of school board seats and community services district seats, but not a lot of countywide races. There's actually only one. So I'd say the big takeaways at this point are that turnout was low. About 20% of registered voters cast ballots that were counted as of last night. Now there are scores, probably 10 to 20,000 ballots that have not yet been counted, that will be counted over the next couple of weeks by the elections office. So all results are preliminary, and a lot of races could swing. And one of those, I would say, is the only county-wide race on the ballot, which is for registrar of voters and clerk recorder, the position that's been held by Kelly Sanders for 8 years now, and she is retiring. And so Juan Pablo Cervantes and Tiffany Hunt Nielsen are vying for that position. Both work in the office in different branches. Juan Pablo Cervantes is the elections manager currently, and Tiffany Hunt Nielsen works on the recorder side as a document. I can't remember her exact title actually, but it's basically a document authenticator. She checks documents to make sure that they're above board. And they have both been kind of running for that position from those different viewpoints, with Juan Pablo Cervantes very much talking election integrity and the importance of the election side of things, and Tiffany Hunt Nielsen very much talking about the clerk recorder side of things and the need to make that side of the office more user-friendly. But it's a razor-thin margin. I think they're separated by about 180 votes, and currently Juan Pablo Cervantes is ahead. It's one of these interesting, well, at least interesting for election nerds, races, where when the first returns were posted last night, they consisted entirely of kind of early voting and vote by mail ballots that arrived at the elections office before election day. And Juan Pablo Cervantes took a really significant majority of those ballots. And then as the election day results kind of trickled in throughout the night, Tiffany Hunt Nielsen really made up a lot of ground. And so now with all these uncounted ballots out there, the nerds among us can guess as to kind of which trend they're going to follow. I think history kind of tells us that those outstanding ballots are mostly outstanding vote by mail ballots, and they tend to trend a little bit more like the first return, which would be good news for Juan Pablo Cervantes. Tiffany Hunt Nielsen, I'm sure, is hoping they bend the other direction. So then, just real quick, we have the races for the 3rd and 5th ward on the Eureka City Council. We're both too close to call, decided by just a couple of points with, again, an unknown amount of ballots outstanding. I think that folks will be curious to know. Two people who have been very much in the headlines of late did not get good news on Election Day. Brett Watson, the embattled city council member who viewers might remember back in May, an outside investigator found had sexually harassed a city employee and abused his power as an elected official. He has defiantly, refused requests for him to step down, announced that he was running for re-election, and got pretty much trounced in the returns last night. Incumbent Meredith Matthews and Planning Commissioner Kimberly White took that race pretty handily, and will be stepping into those two seats on the Arcata City Council. And then over at the Humboldt Community Services District, which I don't think anybody has really written about an election there for probably generations. But Alan Bongio, who readers might remember from his controversy surrounding his role as a Humboldt County Planning Commissioner and the disparaging, racist, and biased remarks he made about the Wiyot tribe of Blue Lake Rancheria back in August, has kind of been embattled since then. And there was a three-way race for 2 seats on that board, the Community Services District Board, and Bongio came up short to challenge Julie Ryan.
Right on.
Position for 24 years. So that is
yeah. I mean, I think those are all that you hit, the ones that people we're either competitive and on people's radar, or just on people's radar for more gossipy reasons. So the unfortunate takeaway also, though, is that, like you said, if about 20% of the votes in, but we're expecting almost another 20% more, not to say anything can happen, but there's still a lot to be determined as the final tally takes place.
Yeah, we'll be writing about this for the next couple of weeks for sure.
Yeah, I think the ultimate election won't get certified for another 5 weeks, so it's official, not for a while yet. And then there's also, real quickly, there's also some ballot initiatives out there, and I'm just going to skim across the top. Yes to reproductive freedom in California. No to both gambling. This is statewide. Yes to funding for arts and education, music education. No for new dialysis requirements. No for a tax on millionaires for wildfire programs, and yes, on banning certain tobacco products. They're all pretty overwhelmingly decisive at the state level so far.
Mm-hmm.
Any other last thoughts before we move on? That
just pick up this week's print edition of the journal for full results, or visit northcoastjournal.com.
Right on. Thank you for your hard work, sacrifice. I know you're hanging in there for dear life. We appreciate you.
Two of us.
Yeah, right. How about you, Jen? What is going on the Arts and Features beat this week?
I slept like a baby.
Thanks.
That's what happens when you cover, outdoor stuff, theater, et cetera, et cetera. And speaking of outdoor stuff and theater, we have both this week. Nice. Our Get Out column is a little bit unusual. It was a weird column that I didn't know exactly where to put it, but it's Sarah Hobart, and typically she writes about birding. So we made it a Get Out. It is a story about bears. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's been a lot of bear activity. I was taking a walk in my neighborhood and there was bear scat on the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
Either it was bear scat or somebody's dog needs to go to the vet now.
Oh, no.
But the bears are out here and they are coming for your garbage cans. I get it. And it's not always like adorable little Paddington coming to find scraps of marmalade sandwiches in your trash. It is a full destruction of the whole garbage can. And it's not just an inconvenience and frankly gross. It's also dangerous. It's not great for us to be around, black bears and whatnot. Although they are intelligent, lovely creatures that we should try to keep safe. Having access to your garbage can makes them not safe. It makes them more likely to become dependent on human food, more comfortable being around humans, more likely to get shot by somebody whose home they break into and make lunch, like in those videos that keep going viral.
Yeah.
So Sarah Hobart did her own research into bear-proof trash cans, and also talked to somebody at you're going to love this, Sean Frez, who is the Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor with the local California Fish and Wildlife Department, right? He was saying that eliminating attractants like pet food, bird seed, all those things keeps us from having curious black bears roaming around in our garden and snacking. But also, this is a great thing that she checked in on. The department has a designated wildlife conflict manager.
Who knew?
So you can go to the CDFW website and check this out. I'm thinking about like grumpy bear roommates, but it is actually about their interactions with people. And the good news is Sarah did find a garbage can that bears can't get into.
Nice.
The bad news is they can still turn it completely upside down. How does this benefit the bear? It doesn't. The bear is just like, oh, really? Was I inconvenienced? Yes. So are you now. And I respect that. The other awesome thing that we have this week, you should definitely read that. And also dire warning at the end. She's concerned that the bears may have learned to read the directions on her bin.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just saying, could happen. Smarter than your average bear, perhaps the bear at Sarah Hobart's. This week we have, speaking of drama, Dorana Banker-Gilkey. You may know her. She's been in some local theater, but she is also the owner of, I want to make sure that I'm saying this right, Dandar's Board Games and Books. Books and board games in Arcata. So yes, she's a huge nerd. She is out here, I think, in her first theater review column for the North Coast Journal. I think she rolled a straight natural 20 on this one. She has reviewed Lifespan of a Fact, which is at Redwood Curtain Theater. And it is about, breathe deep with me, Thad, basically a struggling print publication where the writer and the fact checker disagree on what constitutes something being true as the editor struggles between them.
I love this piece so much. Probably.
Yeah.
I love it so much. I don't know if I want to watch it. As my mom sometimes says of, some movies, I lived it. Why would I want to see it?
Yeah.
But anyway, it looks like a great show, and it has some great folks in it. And it's mostly these three people on stage kind of moving between three kind of stage rooms, I guess. Jordan Dobbins is in there. Tony Cogliotti, and is that how we say it here? Cogliotti is what we would say back east, but it could be Cogliotti here. I'm not sure. And Christina Joras. And apparently they do a fantastic job, but you should definitely go in and read her review, because it's lovely to have yet another voice in our theater roster.
It was pretty cool, actually. I was picturing how the production was framed, the way she described it, and it was really vivid, I guess. Like there was a lot, like she really draws you in. And the one thing that I thought was really funny, not to like get super in the weeds on this, but it was really interesting. She was commenting on one of the details and said the pre-recorded voiceovers are likewise used well, though some might find the volume a bit disconcerting. And then she puts, "That's me, I'm some." Yes. And I was like, oh, she's her and Jen are kindred spirits. This is going to work well.
She's lovely. And like I said, if you're over in Dandar's Board Games and Books, say hello to her. She was actually in or working on the She Kills Monsters story, which is about Dungeons and Dragons. And, we were talking about that experience, and she was saying, with working with much younger people, because it's a, university thing, she was saying, it was kind of cool. Like they're into this thing that now is cool, I guess. But yeah, she's a delight, and I'm looking forward to what she does next. And then next thing that we have in there is I have a satirical piece this week about voting. And thank God it's over for now. So it's titled Yelp Reviews of Voting. And what I did was essentially I kind of looked around and kind of picked up and observed what people were talking about, how they feel about voting. And it has changed. The other day, Facebook threw up one of those memories, the Facebook memory. And it was from, 8 years ago. The last time Election Day was on November 8th. That would be the 2016 election. And it was traumatizing. Thanks a lot, Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
But yeah, people's feelings about voting are really different. And I was kind of surprised to hear about the low voter turnout in Humboldt County, partly because I feel like people have gotten a sense that local and midterm elections are more important. And there were a lot of people that I saw that just were like, yeah, I didn't care about the midterms before. But then frequently there was something that made them feel sort of desperate about it. Usually like one issue they cared about, or sometimes it had to do particularly with the falsehoods about the presidential election being stolen, that really spurred them to realize how important state representatives, county representatives, and even city representatives are. And I didn't mean to say even city representatives. I'm sorry, city council people. You're all important and special. I see you. And, I included people who were complaining about lighting, because I did see a lot of people complaining about just like being in those weird spaces. Like if you haven't been to an elementary school lately, it's brutal. Don't take a voting selfie. What are you thinking? And then of course, something from the people who decided to sit out on a tailgate, armed to the teeth, doing voter intimidation, which we haven't seen so much in Humboldt, but we have seen in other parts of the country. And I kind of was thinking about them. I remember there used to be these really hostile protesters near where I worked at my old job. And they would be standing on the street and calling you names and cussing you out and just like screaming at strangers. But then one time I went into the pizza place across the street, and there was one of them just kind of waiting online with his pizza and his Dr. Pepper. Alone. It was Yeah. So I wanted to get the point of view of that guy too. So I hope you'll enjoy it. And I hope you will remember to vote next time, because apparently we have to keep doing this.
Yeah, we have to keep voting. And as always, lots of clever little takes in there. So we appreciate you big time, Jen. And
thank you.
You can even make voting, make us laugh about voting too. Never take ourselves too seriously. Well, unfortunately, that's about all the time we have this week. Jen, thank you so much. Thad, thanks. We really appreciate you guys.
Thanks for having us.
North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up, stay informed. Also available online 24/7, so you can check them out anytime. Again, thanks everybody out there for listening. Thank you, Jen and Thad, and we look forward to connecting with you guys again next week. Take care till then. Bye, guys.